Hello, we're here at the Tirol TTIP Taalk here in Telfs at the ATTAC Sommerakademie, and I'm sitting here with Brid Brennan. Brid, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, I'm Brid Brennan from the Transatlantic Institute. I coordinate the Economic Justice Programme of the Transatlantic Institute, which has a centre in Amsterdam but is a global network. And we have been involved in the campaigns around free trade and investment, and I'm very pleased to be here in Telfs.
Can you tell us what TTIP stands for?
Well, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. It's a very grand-sounding name. I think it has rather little to do with partnership in the sense of it represents more clearly the growing convergence of interests between the corporate powers in the US and Europe, and less about what could be a genuine partnership of solidarity between the peoples of the US and the peoples of Europe.
What do you think is the biggest threat when it comes to TTIP?
Well, I think the sort of the range and wave of trade and investment agreements which we've had over the last decade are increasingly serving corporate interests, especially the so-called ISDS, the Investment Dispute Settlement Mechanism. This gives investors who are not so faceless. They have great names in all the brand names of corporations that we are familiar with, to be able to sue governments, whereas governments have governments have no binding obligations to respond to the operations, the violations of regulation on finances, on human rights, labor rights, and crimes against the climate and crimes against the environment. That's one major area of threat, I think. And the other area is that, what we have been able to glean on the content of the TTIP is that it envisages a major charter of corporate rights and access to public services and to areas that until now have been somewhat protected in terms of people's interests.
What do you think will change in a global power balance when TTIP is introduced?
Well, I think we would, if indeed it would be introduced, we would see a further consolidation and expansion of the hegemony of corporate interests. And I think one of the indications that this would create a major imbalance in not only in the model of economy as we know it, but in the question of political balance, is the proposal for a super regulatory body. And this, to me, indicates that what's being thought about is sort of, it's a new dimension in a sense of this kind of treaties and agreements where governance, the issue of governance, is no longer in the hands of sovereign governments who have been elected, who have elected representatives and who could be held accountable, but will definitely be at the minimum a shared regulatory body with corporate interests and with corporate participation. So I think this would really be a major shift in the balance of power.
But also the protests and the resistance against TTIP is growing. Can you tell us something about that?
Well, I think for sure in quite a short space, maybe over the last 6 months in particular, once the sort of the implications have been able to go to reach people, that we might be in a very different situation in terms of public services, also the question of lowering standards in terms of the food we consume, in terms of the standards on the environment and so on. I think more and more people actually are not only just affected by receiving this news, but they actually want to get on the street. They want to get involved in particular campaigns. And I think this is a moment also where people are drawing inspiration actually from earlier major mobilizations to defeat such projects, such corporate projects, like the Multilateral Investment and Agreement, the Free Trade Agreement of the Americas, I think, and the continuing resistance globally to this free trade and investment regime that's so biased to corporate interests, and that people are actually beginning to reclaim their citizens' responsibility in relation to being able to defeat it and to promote alternatives, that there are different ways to maybe to state first of all that we need to change the economic model as we have it, and that continuing in the direction of this type of agreements is not a way forward. It's also not an exit from the crisis, so-called crisis we are experiencing, but instead that there are the economy, there needs to be a very fundamental shift and transition in the economy towards people's genuine and basic interests, towards access to basic needs, that water is not for profit, that public services are to serve the people's interests, and that economy and trade and investment is also to serve people's interests.
So this goes pretty well with my last question.
Mm-hmm.
What are the alternatives to so-called free trade and to TTIP?
Well, I think, of course, it's complex. It's a complex question, but I think what we have seen in the last few decades is a model of economy and a collapsing model, in a way, of genuine democracy that is dictated by profits and by profiteering. Actually. We know that the people who have gained, or the interests that have gained in the crisis, are the corporate interests, the big banks, the big corporations, and there has been a major redistribution and a redistribution of wealth from people. Wages have been cut, unemployment and such, to bail out zombie banks and to pay debts that people never incurred, and so on. So, in a sense, we've reached a kind of maybe we would like to think we've reached a pyramid in relation to this, and that the reverse momentum is already beginning to happen, and it is happening in a lot of major areas. I could just mention that, for example, instead of, we'll say, the agribusiness and the corporate agribusiness dominating food and food production, there is the whole movement of food sovereignty, of agriculture, of peasants' rights as against corporate rights in relation to food production. But there's also the issue of water, for example, which had been a banner demand of this wave of the wave of trade and investment, but also of the austerity. I mean, I think it's so many countries in Europe, especially the so-called crisis countries, water privatization has been at the top of the list. So I think what we're seeing is that people are reclaiming water as a human right, as what we need is water justice and not water for profit. But there are so many other areas we could also mention in relation to the environment, that financialization of nature is not on the agenda, that we want areas of the economy where corporates will not have a place.
Thank you so much for this very, very strong insight into TTIP. Thank you, Brid.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.